The great presidium of the Glycan Ascendancy was a chamber designed to suffocate hope. Its walls were not walls at all, but columns of solidified light, stretching into an infinite, stardusted darkness that mimicked the void between galaxies. At its center, a disk of polished obsidian floated, upon which the holographic representation of their predicament churned like a storm of black ink. The silence. It had no name other than the one born of terror and incomprehension. It was a creeping nullity, an expanding sphere of absolute non-existence that consumed star systems not with fire or force, but with an utter and final cessation. Light, matter, energy, even the fabric of causality, simply ceased to be upon its touch. The delegates of the assembled species, a menagerie of forms from the crystalline Vex to the gaseous Lumina, watched the tactical display with a uniform stillness that betrayed a collective, primal dread. For generations, the Ascendancy had been the unassailable authority of the spiral arm, its doctrines of order, purity, and control the bedrock of interstellar civilization. Now that bedrock was cracking. Kalen Vor, first speaker of the Cathar, felt the low thrum of his colony's shared anxiety through the subdermal filaments of his carapace. His people were insectoid, their thoughts a subtle chorus that informed his own, but his individual consciousness was a lonely island in a sea of shared fear. He had seen empires rise and fall in his long life, but he had never seen an enemy that could not be fought, reasoned with, or even understood. The silence was an ontological plague. It was the universe forgetting itself. His multifaceted eyes shifted from the abyssal stain on the map to the figure presiding over the council, High Executor Zarthus of the Vex. Zarthus was a monument of living crystal, his form a perfect, towering geometric lattice that refracted the chamber's sterile light into 1,000 cold, sharp glints. His voice, when it came, was not a vibration of air but a direct resonance, a hum that seemed to emanate from the very structure of the presidium. "The reports are conclusive," Zarthus resonated, his tone devoid of any inflection that could be mistaken for emotion. "The resonance barriers at the Cygnus threshold have failed. The sector has been nullified. Our finest strategic minds, our most powerful energy projections, have proven ineffective. The silence does not resist, it does not counter, it simply undoes." A low murmur rippled through the assembled delegates, a discordant symphony of clicks, chimes, and whispers. The Vex doctrine, the foundation of ascendancy military and political strategy, was built on the principle of harmonic counterfrequency. For every force, an equal and opposite resonance. For every problem, a perfectly calculated, logical solution. But how did one counter nothing? How did one apply logic to the illogical end of existence itself? "We have increased power to the remaining barrier fleets," Zarthus continued, his crystalline form shimmering with an internal light that signaled unwavering conviction. "The archives of 1,000,000 worlds are being scoured for precedent, for any historical mention of such a phenomenon. We will find the correct frequency. We will re-establish order. The integrity of the Ascendancy is not in question." Kalen Vor shifted his weight, the chitin of his legs scraping softly on the deck. It was a lie, a beautifully structured, logically consistent lie. Every delegate in this chamber knew the truth. They were not holding the line, they were merely measuring the speed of their own extinction. Their ships were candles in a hurricane, their shields were whispers against a void that consumed sound itself. He had spent the last cycle in deep communion with the Cathar collective, sifting through not just their own history, but through the shared archives of the Ascendancy, looking for patterns the Vex might have missed in their rigid pursuit of pure logic. The Vex saw history as a series of equations to be solved. Kalen Vor and the Cathar saw it as a tapestry of interwoven stories, of choices made and unmade, of philosophies that lived and died. And in a dusty, cordoned-off corner of that tapestry, he had found a thread they had cut long ago. A thread he now knew they must try to grasp again, no matter how much it burned. He activated his vocalization rune. The soft, chittering language of the Cathar filled the air, translated instantly by the chamber's ubiquitous field into the Ascendancy's formal, emotionless trade tongue. "High Executor, my colony mind has reached a consensus that diverges from the current strategy." Zarthus rotated his crystalline spire, a motion of 1,000 shifting facets, to fix his attention on the Cathar delegate. The internal light within him dimmed slightly, a sign of immense displeasure. "Divergence is the first step toward chaos, first speaker. The Vex path is the only path to stability. Please." "Enter your data. There is no new data on the silence," Kalen Vor admitted, feeling the weight of the council's gaze upon him. "My proposal concerns a resource the Ascendancy has long since abandoned, a methodology we once deemed too volatile, too impure to be of use." He paused, letting the silence in the room deepen, mirroring the greater void that threatened them all. "I speak of the species known as humanity. A shockwave of protest erupted in the Presidium. The Lumina delegates flared with agitated light. The silicon-based Omicrons vibrated with audible, dissonant chords. It was Zarthus, however, who quelled the chamber with a single, sharp pulse of resonant energy. The silence that followed was heavier, more oppressive than before. "You dare!" Zarthus resonated, his voice now a low, dangerous thrum, like a mountain grinding its foundations to dust. "You dare speak that name in this hallowed chamber? Have you forgotten the Edict of Severance? Have you forgotten the Great Quarantine? Humanity was a psychic contagion, a species so mired in its own chaotic emotional spectra that it threatened the very fabric of stable reality. Their methodology was irrationality, their resource was madness. They were outlawed, cast out, and isolated behind a containment field that spans their entire star system. To even suggest we turn to them for aid is not merely divergence, first speaker. It is heresy. It is desperation, Kalen Vor countered, his own voice steady despite the tremor he felt from his collective. I have reviewed the pre-severance archives. Yes, they were chaotic, unpredictable. Their emotions were a storm we could not chart. But what is the silence if not the ultimate unknowable chaos? Our logic has failed, High Executor. Our order has been broken. The Vex path has led us to a precipice. The humans, they did not fear the unknown. They embraced it. They innovated not through rigid calculation, but through intuition, through passion, through desperation. They thrived on the very precipice where we now stand. They were a disease, a delegate from the reptilian SSA hissed. Their art was sorrow, their music was rage, their diplomacy was a lie veiled in a smile. They could feel hope and despair in the same moment. It was an aberration. An aberration that allowed them to adapt at rates we could not comprehend. Kalen Vor pressed on, his multifaceted eyes fixed on Zarthus. They collapsed quantum states with observation because they believed it was possible. They built starships held together by principles our finest engineers deemed paradoxical. They did not see the universe as an equation to be solved, but as a mystery to be experienced. When we faced the Geor hive, whose swarms defied all tactical prediction, it was a human fleetmaster who shattered their formations not with superior firepower, but with a strategy of such beautiful, terrifying illogic that the hive mind itself suffered a catastrophic failure. Zarthus's crystalline form seemed to sharpen, its edges growing more defined. An anecdotal victory that does not excuse their fundamental flaw. Their empathy was a weapon they turned on themselves as often as their enemies. Their individuality led to endless internal conflict. They were a house divided, a fire consuming its own fuel. We did them a kindness by caging them. We saved the galaxy from their psychic contamination, and we saved them from their own self-destruction. Did we? Kalen Vor asked, his voice dropping to a near whisper that still carried across the silent chamber. We have not monitored them for centuries. We declared them anathema and looked away. We assumed they would decay, that their chaos would consume them within their cage. We assumed this because it was the logical outcome. But logic has failed us. What if in that isolation their greatest perceived weakness, their volatile, emotional, imperfect nature, did not destroy them? What if it was the crucible that forged them into something else, something stronger? The idea hung in the air, a terrifying and seductive possibility. The council was silent, caught between the dogma of centuries and the encroaching abyss. The Vex saw imperfection as a flaw to be purged. Every other species in the ascendancy had, to some degree, adopted this philosophy. They had smoothed their own rough edges, suppressed their own cultural idiosyncrasies, all to fit the Vex model of a stable, orderly galactic society. They had become predictable, and the silence fed on predictability. What you propose is unthinkable, Zarthus finally resonated, though the absolute certainty had bled from his tone, replaced by something colder. To breach the quarantine, to invite that chaos back into our reality could accelerate our demise. Or it could be our only salvation, Kalen Vor stated, standing as tall as his segmented body would allow. We are dying, High Executor. We are being erased from existence, one star system at a time, and We are doing so in a very orderly, logical fashion. I propose a single vessel, a diplomatic mission, to travel to the Sol system to observe and, if possible, to ask for aid. If they have destroyed themselves, we have lost nothing but a little time. If they have survived, then we must know what they have become. The Cathar colony mind has authorized this proposal. I will lead the mission myself. The debate that followed was long and fraught with the terror of the unknown. Species that had stood with the Vex for millennia found their certainty wavering. The cold, hard fact of their ongoing annihilation was a more compelling argument than any appeal to history or dogma. The great, dark stain on the map continued its silent, inexorable creep, a visual testament to the failure of their ways. When the vote was finally called, It was not a triumphant victory for reason, but a quiet, fearful concession to last resort. The proposal passed by the narrowest of margins. High Executor Zarthus did not move for a long time after the verdict was cast. His crystalline form was still, the light within him a dull, cold gray. "So be it, First Speaker," he resonated, the sound like the cracking of ancient ice. "You will take the asterisk Stellarch's gaze and you will breach the quarantine, but be warned. You are seeking a cure from a plague. Do not be surprised if the only thing you bring back is a more colorful death." Kalenvor bowed his head, a gesture of respect his colony mind did not feel. The fear he felt was immense, but it was now laced with something else, something he had not felt in a very long time. It was a sliver of the very thing the humans were once famous for. It was a fragile, illogical, and utterly necessary flicker of hope. As he turned to leave the Presidium, the great obsidian disk showed the silence consuming another star, its light vanishing not in an explosion, but in a final, quiet exhalation into nothing. The journey to the Sol system was a pilgrimage into a forgotten past. The asterisk Stellarch's gaze was a vessel of the Cathar, more organic and curved than the rigid geometric ships of the Vex, but it was still a product of ascendancy design philosophy, efficient, logical, and sterile. As they traversed the parsecs, Kalenvor and his crew of Cathar acolytes studied the sealed historical archives on humanity. The records were heavily censored, colored by the Vex interpretation of the events leading to the severance. They painted a picture of a brilliant but dangerously unstable race. There were records of their art, symphonies that could evoke profound sorrow, sculptures that captured the agony of existence, texts that explored the darkest corners of the psyche. To the ascendancy, this was evidence of their psychic contagion. They saw records of their wars. Vicious, brutal conflicts fought with a passion that horrified the calm, collected species of the Council. But they also saw records of their alliances, of acts of profound self-sacrifice, of soldiers giving their lives not for logic or strategy, but for the comrades standing next to them. This, too, was dismissed as a symptom of their emotional instability. The Vex could not comprehend sacrificing a valuable asset for a sentimental reason. As they neared the quarantine zone, the ship systems began to issue automated warnings that had not been heard in centuries. The quarantine was not a physical barrier, but a complex distortion of spacetime, a gravity well designed to make navigation into or out of the system a statistical impossibility. No ship could pass through it by chance. It required the precise nullification codes held only by the High Executor himself. Kalenvor transmitted the codes, his manipulators clicking softly on the console. The ship shuddered as it passed through the shimmering, invisible wall. On the other side, the stars looked different, sharper, brighter, as if a layer of dust had been wiped clean from the lens of the universe. The crew grew tense. According to ascendancy projections, the Sol system should be a chaotic war zone, a testament to a self-devouring species. They expected a sky filled with debris, the radioactive signatures of planetary bombardments, or at the very least a cacophony of unregulated signals. They were met with silence, a deep, profound, and peaceful silence. There were no fleets of warships. There were no hails demanding their surrender. There was only the quiet, steady light of the yellow star ahead. Sensors are picking up. Anomalies, the ship's navigator chittered, its voice tight with confusion. The planets are all there. Mars shows signs of extensive terraforming. The asteroid belt has been organized. Structures of immense size are in orbit around Jupiter and Saturn, but they do not match any known design philosophy. They are elegant. Kalenvor peered at the forward view screen. He saw what the navigator meant. The human structures were not the blocky, functional fortresses of the ascendancy. They were flowing, graceful things like sculptures of spun metal and light, woven into the rings of Saturn or hanging in Jupiter's orbit like jewels. There was no sign of weaponry, no visible shield emitters, no cannon emplacements. It was either the most sophisticated deception imaginable or a truth so alien to their understanding that it was terrifying. Then a signal came. It was not a broad transmission, but a tightly focused beam aimed directly at their bridge. It was a simple audio-visual message. No ascendancy encryption, no military protocols, just a voice and a face. The face was of an old human female, her skin lined with age, her hair the color of snow. Her eyes were dark and calm, and held a depth of wisdom that seemed to resonate across the void. The voice was smooth, with a gentle cadence, speaking the ascendancy's trade tongue flawlessly, but with an archaic accent that Kalenvor had only ever heard in the oldest archives. "Welcome to Sol, First Speaker Kalenvor of the Cathar. The asterisk Stellarch's gaze is cleared for approach to Haven Station, Orbit 7, Jupiter. We have been expecting you." The message ended. A wave of disbelief and fear washed through the Cathar crew. The first speaker felt it himself. We have been expecting you. How could they possibly have known? The decision to come here had been made only a short time ago in the most secure chamber in the galaxy. Detect a ship traversing the quarantine was one thing. To know its name and his was another entirely. It was impossible. It defied every law of physics and information travel. High Executor Zarthus warned of deception, his second-in-command whispered, the thought a faint echo in the local colony mind. The Vex see deception in anything that does not conform to their logic, Kalen Vor replied, though his own certainty was shaken. They gave us no threats, only an invitation we will accept. He guided the ship toward the designated coordinates, a great spindle-shaped station nestled within the swirling clouds of Jupiter. As they drew closer, the sheer scale of it became apparent. It was vast, a city in space, but it was green. Great transparent domes revealed forests, rivers, and parks. It was not a machine for living in, it was a world. They were guided into a docking bay that was less a sterile metal chamber and more a grand arboretum, the walls covered in flowering vines, the air filled with the scent of moist earth and chlorophyll. The atmosphere was perfectly breathable for his species. They had known their physiology as well. Kalen Vor disembarked with a small honor guard, his ceremonial robes feeling strangely out of place in this tranquil, organic environment. Waiting for them was the woman from the transmission. She stood alone, dressed in simple, flowing gray robes. She was not flanked by soldiers or armed guards. She simply stood there, a serene smile on her face. "First speaker," she said, her voice as calm as it had been on the transmission. "I am Ambassador Eva Rostova. On behalf of humanity, I welcome you. It has been a long time since we have had guests." "Ambassador," Kalen Vor responded, inclining his head. "Your greeting was unexpected. You say you were expecting us." "May I ask how that is possible?" Eva's smile did not waver. "Patience, first speaker. All will be explained. I imagine you have come a great distance and are burdened by grave matters. Please walk with me." She led them not to a sterile briefing room, but along a winding path through a grove of trees that rustled in a gentle, simulated breeze. Birds with vibrant plumage flitted between the branches. It was disorienting. He had come to a system of outlaws, expecting to find monsters. He had found a garden. "The Ascendancy believes we destroyed ourselves," Eva said, her tone conversational, as if discussing ancient history. It was a logical assumption. A species as fractious and emotional as ours, confined to a single system, should have turned its weapons inward, and we almost did. She paused beside a tranquil pond, its surface reflecting the colossal, swirling face of Jupiter through the dome above. The first century after the quarantine was difficult. We called it the Age of Echoes. Old hatreds, old divisions, they screamed in the sudden silence. We were alone with only our own flaws for company. The Vex believed our emotions were a plague. For a time they were right, but a plague can be survived. The patient can develop an immunity. The species can adapt. Kalen Vor listened, his mind struggling to reconcile this calm, philosophical woman with the historical records of the chaotic, warlike humans. "How did you adapt?" "We stopped trying to conquer our nature," Eva explained, her gaze distant. "We stopped trying to purge the flaws the Vex so feared, the sorrow, the anger, the fear, the irrational joy. We realized they were not flaws, they were tools. They were different lenses through which to perceive reality." Logic is a powerful tool, but it is only one. An artist's grief can see a truth a scientist's equation cannot. A soldier's hope can achieve a victory a general's strategy deems impossible. She turned to face him, her eyes seeming to peer directly into his mind. "We turned inward. We studied not the cosmos, but consciousness, not the laws of physics, but the architecture of the soul. We learned to listen to our own internal chaos, to find the patterns within it, the harmony in the discord. We integrated our technology with our biology, not to become unfeeling machines, but to become more deeply, more completely human." She raised a hand, and the air in front of them shimmered. A complex, three-dimensional image appeared, a web of impossibly intricate glowing filaments. It looked like a map of a galactic supercluster, or perhaps a diagram of a brain. "When the Vex cast us out, they feared a psychic contagion. In their fear, they predicted our greatest achievement. This is the noosphere. A collective consciousness is too simple a term. It is a substrate of shared experience woven through quantum entanglement. Every human mind is a node. We can share knowledge, sensation, memory, emotion without sacrificing our individuality. It is our art and our science combined. It is the evolution of empathy." Kalen Vor stared at the shimmering web, his mind reeling. This was the source of their power. This was how they had known he was coming. His mission, the debate in the Presidium, the fear of the Ascendancy. It must have created a resonance, a pattern of thought and emotion that echoed across the galaxy. And the noosphere, this vast, sensitive web of consciousness, had felt it. They weren't just advanced, They had transcended the very limitations of physical distance and communication. We felt the Ascendancy's fear, Eva confirmed his unspoken thought. It is a cold, sharp, and brittle thing, and we felt the approach of the silence. We have been watching it from afar for some time, a wave of entropy that unravels reality. You have come to ask for our help. It was not a question. Kalenvor finally found his voice. Our weapons are useless, our strategies are futile, we are being unmade, and we do not know why. You are trying to fight a concept, Eva said simply. You fire weapons of energy and matter at an enemy that is the absence of energy and matter. You are trying to shout at silence. It will only ever swallow your voice. She gestured again, and the image of the noosphere was replaced by a tactical simulation. He saw the Ascendancy fleets, their rigid formations firing colossal beams of energy into the blackness of the silence. The beams simply vanished, their light and heat consumed without a trace. Your approach is logical, Eva commented without judgment. To destroy an enemy, you apply overwhelming force. Then the simulation changed. Human ships appeared. They were not the angular, weaponized vessels of the Ascendancy. They were sleek, organic, almost alive, like great silver seeds drifting in the void. They approached the edge of the silence, but they did not fire. Instead, they began to emit a field, a soft, golden resonance that expanded outwards. Where the field touched the edge of the silence, the nullity did not vanish. It solidified. The creeping edge of nothingness stopped, held in place by the gentle, persistent glow. What is this technology? Kalenvor asked, his voice filled with awe. We call them ontological anchors, Eva explained. They are not weapons, they do not project force. They reinforce the fundamental constants of reality in a localized area. They remind spacetime of its own rules. They do not fight the nothingness. They simply insist upon existence. It is a technology born not of a desire to conquer, but of a desperate need to preserve. In our isolation, we had to learn to protect the sanctity of our own existence from our own worst impulses. We have merely scaled the principle. The first speaker of the Cathar stood in the artificial forest, light years from his home, and felt the entire foundation of his worldview crumble. The Ascendancy, with its fleets and its doctrines and its million worlds, was a child throwing rocks at the ocean. Humanity, the outcasts, the flawed, emotional plague, had learned to command the tides. They had been outlawed by the Galactic Council for being too chaotic, and in their exile they had mastered the very nature of reality itself. They had not just survived their exile, they had transcended it. They had emerged stronger, wiser, and more powerful than their former jailers could have ever imagined. Kalenvor lowered his head, a true gesture of humility this time. Ambassador Rostova, we were wrong. For centuries, my people and all the Ascendancy have lived by a lie. We feared your nature, and in doing so, we blinded ourselves to your strength. The Glycan Ascendancy formally requests the aid of humanity. Eva Rostova's ex. Prescience softened, the serene wisdom in her eyes now touched by a deep, ancient sadness. There is no need for formality, first speaker. We are all children of the same universe. We will not allow it to fall silent. We will help. The return of Kalenvor to the Presidium was not met with triumph, but with a stunned, fearful silence. As he stood once more upon the obsidian disk, he did not merely speak of his findings, he showed them. Projected the recordings from the asterisk Stellarch's gaze, the tranquil living world of Haven Station, the calm wisdom of Ambassador Rostova, and the final, devastating simulation of the ontological anchors holding the silence at bay. The assembled delegates watched, their own philosophies and certainties shattering like glass. The Vex, in their rigid pursuit of purity, had cast out the one species that held the key to their salvation. High Executor Zarthus remained motionless, a statue of frozen light. The data was irrefutable, the logic of the situation inescapable. His entire worldview, the bedrock of Vex identity for millennia, had been invalidated. Their greatest enemy was not the silence, but their own arrogance. Their greatest failure was not a strategic miscalculation, but a profound lack of understanding. They turned their supposed flaw into their ultimate weapon, a delegate from the Lumina flared, its light form pulsing with awe. Their empathy became a network of consciousness. Their desperation to survive became a technology that preserves reality itself. They will help us, Kalenvor announced, his voice ringing with a conviction that was now his own, not merely an echo of his colony mind. They ask for nothing in return, no apologies, no reparations for their long exile. They see the threat to the universe as a threat to all, and they will act. The debate this time was short. There was no argument to be made against survival. The Edict of Severance was unanimously and quietly rescinded. The Great Quarantine was to be dismantled. Humanity was no longer an outlaw. They were to be an ally. A fleet of human ships, already en route, would rendezvous with the Ascendancy's barrier fleets at the new edge of the silence. The ascendancy would provide support, resources, and their own considerable, if currently ineffective, military might. For the first time, a joint command was established, with authority shared between the ascendancy fleet marshals and the the humans did not have a traditional command structure. They had a strategic consensus, arrived at through the noosphere. The joint fleet that assembled in the void was a study in contrasts. The vast, geometric dreadnoughts of the Vex and the blocky, functional cruisers of the other ascendancy races stood side by side with the human vessels. The human ships were things of beauty, their hulls shimmering with a pearlescent light, their forms flowing and organic. They had no visible weapon ports, no menacing projections. They looked more like vessels of exploration and creation than of war. Kalen Vore was aboard the human flagship, the Odyssey at the personal invitation of Eva Rostova. The bridge was not a sterile command center, but a calm, open space that felt more like a viewing lounge, with comfortable chairs and holographic displays that seemed to float in the air like art installations. "The Ascendancy fleet is in position," the Vex fleet marshal reported, his resonant voice stiff with a newfound, grudging respect. "We are prepared to fire on your command." Eva Rostova stood before the main viewport, which showed the terrifying, absolute blackness of the silence. "That will not be necessary, Marshal. Our purpose here is not to attack." As she spoke, the human ships moved forward, a silent, graceful armada plunging toward the edge of nothingness. They began to emit their golden resonance, and the ontological anchors activated. A vast wall of shimmering, stable reality formed, and the inexorable advance of the silence was halted. A collective sigh of relief went through the Ascendancy crews, a wave of emotion so powerful that Kalen Vore could feel it even without a noosphere. They had done it. They had stopped the end of the universe, but the humans did not stop. Their ships continued to advance, pushing the golden field into the silence, carving a protected corridor into the nullity. "What are you doing?" Kalen Vore asked, his fear returning. "To enter it is to be unmade." "The anchors will protect us," Eva said, her eyes fixed on the blackness ahead. "We did not come here merely to build a wall, first speaker. We came to understand. The silence is not a force of nature. It is too perfect, too uniform. It is artificial." This new revelation sent another shockwave through the assembled fleets. An artificial void, a weapon of such power, was inconceivable. Kalen Vore watched as the Odyssey and its sister ships pushed deeper into the absolute darkness, surrounded by their bubble of real. The ship's sensors designed to read energy and matter registered nothing. But other, more esoteric sensors, the ones integrated with the noosphere, were reading something else. A pattern, a structure within the nothingness. "We are approaching the source," Eva whispered. Her face was a mask of intense concentration. Every human on the bridge was perfectly still, their minds linked in a singular purpose, sifting through the impossible data. "It is not a weapon, not in the way we understand it." On the main screen at the heart of the void they had penetrated, a point of distortion appeared. It was not light, but an absence of absence, a flicker of something that was trying to be. "We are receiving a signal," Eva said, her voice filled with a wonder that bordered on reverence. "It's been broadcasting on a carrier wave of pure causality for eons, buried so deep in the null field that nothing but a conscious observer in a stable reality frame could perceive it." She closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, Kalen Vore knew that everything was about to change once more. She turned to face him, her expression somber and profound. She broadcast her next words not just to him, but to the entire joint fleet, to the Presidium, to every world in the Ascendancy. "The silence is not an enemy. It is a sanctuary. It is a message in a bottle, and the bottle is a pocket universe of absolute zero potential. We have just uncorked it." She raised her hand, and the signal was translated. It was not sound or text. It was a stream of pure, unadulterated concept, a language of mathematics and philosophy that poured directly into the minds of all who received it. It told a story from a time before the Vex, before the Cathar, before any of the Ascendancy's races had even left their primordial oceans. It was the story of a civilization so advanced they had become beings of pure information, their consciousness woven into the fabric of spacetime. They were the forerunners, and they had encountered an enemy. Not an enemy of flesh or steel, but a true cosmic horror, a non-sentient, universe-consuming informational plague. A self-replicating pattern of hyper-complex data that corrupted and overwrote reality, turning galaxies into a meaningless, screaming chaos of fractured physics and paradoxical existence. They called it the corrupting static. They fought it, but they could not defeat it. To fight it was to interact with it, and to interact with it was to become infected by it. Their only solution was to save what they could. They could not build a wall of matter or energy, as the static would simply consume it. So they built a wall of its opposite. They took their entire sector of the galaxy, all its stars, planets, and life, and using a technology beyond all comprehension, they collapsed its quantum state to absolute zero. They created the silence, a perfect null space, a bubble of non-existence where the static could not gain a foothold. They locked themselves inside this sanctuary of nothingness to preserve their knowledge and to wait. And their message, the signal they had been broadcasting for billions of years, was not a call for help. It was a warning. The corrupting static was still out there. It was ancient, vast, and patient. And the recent expansion of the silence, the very event that had terrified the Ascendancy, had been a deliberate act by the Forerunners. They had detected the approach of a new tendril of the static toward this galactic arm. They were expanding their shield to protect the younger races. The message ended. Across the Glycan Ascendancy, a silence of a different kind fell. A silence born of sheer, soul-crushing revelation. High Executor Zarthus stood in the Presidium, his crystalline form seeming to sag, the internal light that was his life force flickering like a dying ember. His entire civilization was based on the idea of imposing order on a chaotic universe. Now he knew they were merely children, squabbling in a sandbox, while outside the walls a true and final chaos was stirring. Aboard the Odyssey, Kalen Vor looked from the translated message to the face of Eva Rostova. He finally understood. He understood humanity's true strength. When faced with the ultimate unknown, the Ascendancy had tried to fight it. They had brought their guns and their shields and their unshakable logic. Humanity, the outcasts, the emotionally volatile, the illogical ones, had done something else. They had listened. Their empathy, their curiosity, their acceptance of things beyond their understanding, the very qualities for which they had been exiled, were the only things in the universe that could have received this message. The Forerunners gave us their knowledge, Eva said softly, her voice carrying the weight of 1,000,000,000 years of solitude. The principles of the static, the nature of its contagion, they have given us the tools to fight or at least to endure. Their vigil is over. Ours is Ob. Out to begin. Kalen Vor looked out at the edge of the silence, which no longer seemed like an enemy. It was a monument, a tomb and a cradle. He looked at the human ships, their golden light a beacon of existence in the void. They were the outlaws, the exiles, the flawed, and they were now the only hope for a galaxy that had once cast them into darkness. The great cosmic irony was so profound it bordered on a divine truth. The Ascendancy had feared the chaos within humanity, and had never imagined that humanity would be the only ones prepared to face the true chaos without. The future was no longer a matter of maintaining order, but of surviving a storm beyond all imagining, and Kalen Vor knew, with a certainty that resonated deeper than any colony mind, that their journey had only just begun.